Hello and welcome to episode 10 of Robins on the Wire, a Bristol live podcast covering all things Bristol City. We've had a bit of a break between games, but that's not stopped the plenty going on around Bristol City the last few days. We've had a fans forum, Gerhard Struber's pre-match press conference. I've had my first chance to meet Neto Boers as well. Jack, how are you, mate? I don't think you quite got to the fans forum last night, did you? But I'm sure you've been across everything that's going on.
I have. I was meant to be at the fans forum and then completely forgot to get. It was free, wasn't it? Get a ticket. So that was good. So yeah, no fans forum for me. Managed to watch it this morning though after I'd been keeping tabs on various bits. The most important thing, and I think probably the best place to start, is the Rob Dickie contract extension and the interesting way of phrasing it on City's Twitter.
Yeah, I think the media team were probably quite proud of the Dickie extends caption. I imagine Rob Dickie was probably a fan of it as well. Yeah, we kind of got told that was coming yesterday. I think quite a nice way to announce it as well. I think at the fans forum, with him there. There's a new deal. An extension to his old deal. His old deal was due to expire this summer, but had a 1-year option on it, and now he is tied down to that'll be summer 2028, which I think will take him to around 31, 32. I guess what are your kind of thoughts on that one, Jack? When you saw it announced, were you happy, relieved? Kind of what was your feeling around it?
I was buzzing. To be fair, I think it's a big tick in the box. I think he was one of the ones. I mean, I know he had that extension clause written in, but it's never really a guarantee, is it? One of the ones I was looking to be like, right, we need to tie him down. I think he's had a really strong start to the season. In fairness, I thought he had a really good year last year, barring the red card in the playoffs, which I'm still fuming about. But other than that, I can't really fault him for the last sort of 18 months or so now. And I think it's a big one to get tied down. Like you said, it was a nice way to announce it as well. They opened the fans forum with it, get everyone on side immediately. And obviously with him being there as well as vice captain, stepping up to be captain the last few games without Jason Knight. I think it's definitely deserved. And yeah, it's a big one to throw in the box for me.
Yeah, I think he's a really important part of that team, as much off the field as he is on it. We've spoken a lot about it being quite a young group, and I think that kind of marker does move because obviously all the youngsters are starting to get a bit older. Your Zach Vyners now are quite experienced players, but yeah, I think when you think about it, he played such an important role last year, and I think people might have been a bit critical of his individual performances at times, but he played 30 odd games. I think it's about 36 games in a team that got in the top 6 and popped up with some really important performances in that time. I mean, I mentioned it yesterday that the Sunderland goal for me is that felt like a real turning point in that back end of the season. I think it was the leveler in that game. Didn't Ross McCrory get the winner? And it shifted the momentum at Ashton Gate. It really helped him kick on. He started the season reasonably well. I think I've been a bit surprised by some of the criticism at times. I thought, especially against Ipswich, I thought he was really strong. As I did against Preston, I thought Preston was perhaps his best performance this season. He was up against Osmajic, who such a handful. He showed that while he's maybe not as quick as the other defenders, you give him a big physical centre forward to mark. That's the sort of game he relishes.
Yeah, 100%. It's ideal for him, isn't it? Him and Atkinson very similar in that regard. I think maybe not the quickest. When they've got little sort of players running in and around them, get under their feet a bit. I think we saw it a lot with Aidan Flint as well, going back a few years. He always flourished in those games where he was up against someone that he could match physically, rather than having to be fast and read the game a little bit more, I suppose. But I mean, Dickie's more than capable of doing both, of course. But yeah, I think the last, especially in this little run of 4 where we've not picked up a win, I think he's probably been the standout in the 2 points that we have got.
Yeah, and I think when you consider he's kind of been playing with different centre-back partners all season, it feels a bit like, I think he made the comment to us. We did press with him a few weeks ago, and it was the first ever time he played with Rob Atkinson this season, despite both being at the club. Well, he's been at the club for 2 years now. Zach's obviously moved further forward, and he's had George Tanner back there. He's had Neto. It's a fair bit of change around him, and he has been that consistent sort of member of that back three, if you like. Yeah, I think it was a good start to the fans forum. I think, would you like to start there, and then we can go on to we can tie the press conference into the Norwich game, can't we? So yeah, it was an event held last night for when we were recording Wednesday night at Ashton Gate. There was a 4-person panel, so it was City Chief Exec Tom Rawcliffe, Technical Director Brian Tinian, Head Coach Gerhard Struber, and vice captain Rob Dickey. There we go. Already forgot him there. But I guess you watched it back this morning, Jack. Where do you feel is like a good place to start with your reflections on that one?
I think it was. I think everybody came across pretty well. Sorry, I think Tom Rawcliffe especially. That's the first time I've sort of heard him speak. I've missed the interviews he's done. I think with Sound of the City. I've obviously read your one up, of course, with Bristol Live, but not managed to sort of get around to listening to him properly, if that makes sense. I thought he spoke really, really well, really clearly. Mopped up the odd comment here and there that maybe went a little bit astray from people. And yeah, I think he came across really well. Tinian, we know what he provides. Obviously, he's been here a long time. We all know how he comes across in these sort of things. He answered the Sinclair Armstrong question really, really well, I thought, about how he's still young. You know, in January, yes, we maybe could have doubled our money, as he said on BBC Bristol back then, but he'd only been here 6 months, and you know he was quite open about the fact that if him and Mayulu don't start putting in at least better performances and ideally getting some goals by January, we're going to need to look to strengthen in that area because we can't just rely on Emil Rees. Struber and Dickey came across very sensible, kind of know what they're doing, but didn't really have as much to say. I think because we hear from them a lot, especially Struber, obviously we hear from press conferences every week. We heard one earlier that day. A lot of questions were maybe angled more towards the recruitment and stuff like that, towards Rawcliffe and Tinian, and you hear more from them because you hear from them less often.
Yeah, I think starting on Tom, I think I agree with you. Now I've had the privilege of interviewing him and meeting him a couple of times now, and I always think he comes across incredibly honest, and I think that's such a it shouldn't be a pleasing thing because you kind of think that should be the expectation, but you can tell he's kind of, although he's worked a lot in football, you can tell he's kind of got that different sort of background. I like the way it was just little things like he was repeating people's questions back to him and asking if that had answered their question at the end of his answers. He came across, I thought, really well, and he doesn't pretend to be something he's not. I quite like it when he goes, "Oh, that's a question for Brian, that's a question for Gerhard," rather than trying to answer things that maybe aren't his remit. I think when you consider it's kind of his first sort of outing in that sort of environment, I thought he came across really well. You touched on it there. I guess one of the first big standouts for me was the question around Sinclair and Fally. It was basically a case of, I just thought whoever asked the question asked it really well as well, because they made it clear that they weren't talking about Sinclair Armstrong, the person. They were saying about the footballer, and just, I guess, the fact he's not probably hit the standards or developed in the way that most fans would have expected. And like you kind of alluded to there, Brian Tinney answered it quite honestly and basically said, they probably haven't quite kicked on as much as they would have liked. They had a decision to make when they sold Tommy of whether they go out and get one proven forward or they get two potential forwards. They went for that one, and so far they've not quite, matched that potential or realised that potential is probably the better way of putting it. But yeah, the standout line to me was kind of what you said there. We can't quote it verbatim, we've not got it in front of us, but it was along the lines of, if they get to January and they decide they want to sell them, there's a confidence there that they'll be able to get money for them, and there is interest there. So I guess that it feels like almost what we knew in the summer, but it seems like that's going to be the case. It's down to them, I guess. The challenge for them now is show us why we can't afford to sell you.
Yeah, definitely. And like you said, I think the phrasing of sort of that choice that the club had to make, on paper, they probably did go for the right one. We already had Naki Wells at the club, who was a proven goal scorer. Yes, it would have been excellent to get in a 25-year-old who can bang in 15, 20 goals a season, but there was nothing at the time, even after the first two games, to be fair, there was nothing at the time to say that Fally Mayulu wasn't that as well. He performed excellently in Austria, hit the ground running for those first couple of games. Even at Derby away, I thought he came on and looked all right at the start of last season, in a pretty drab performance from the rest of them. But obviously, it's not quite worked out as of yet. There's still time for them to turn around. They're both got to end up playing games over the next 2.5 months before the January window opens. Like you said, they need to show everybody why we can't afford to get rid of them. I think the fans are still, the hardcore fans, I hate that term, but to use it here, are still kind of on side with them. You hear it when every time they come on the pitch, they get their names sung still. It's not like they get booed on or anything like that. It's just that they need maybe just a goal just to get them up and running again.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. Obviously, my view is always kind of different from, you're watching it from probably a more objective than emotional position. You obviously, most grounds you're kind of out of where the City fans are as well. And the impression I get is that everybody wants them to succeed. Like nobody wants players to come in and do badly, do they ever? You never see football fans more excited than when a new signing comes in. And I think probably what has actually made both players frustrating is there's been those moments where you've thought, okay, the penny's dropped. They're there now. I think back to I think Tom Rawcliffe mentioned it last night. Sinclair start to the season last year, where he did play a fair amount. He basically was the first choice striker for the first 2 months of the season. Scored a couple of goals, couple of bright performances, and you thought, okay, there's a player here. Same with Fally off the bench. You had that thing of the penny's there. He's dropped. He's found his goals. He's a finisher. He just needs to get up to speed. And it almost feels like since that first couple of months, they've not quite met that standard again. I guess the question that's going to come around in January is there may be interest and there may be people willing to pay money for both players. What sort of money are they willing to pay? Is it enough to make you think it's worth selling them if you decide to do that? And equally, you've had them both on the books for 18 months. They're put Fally a bit lesser, but you've been paying their wages and paying for their development to then make a loss on them. At which point, is that as good a decision as going out and signing someone who would have been proven? I'm not sure. And it's not that simple, is it? It's not that black and white. But it felt like kind of the first time there's been that bit of almost an admission that, it's not quite worked out as they'd hoped.
Yeah, definitely. And it was sort of a breath of fresh air to see someone just kind of take that ownership and say, look, yeah, maybe we did get the decision wrong, but this is the situation we were in. Lay it out quite clearly. I think a lot of fans maybe understand it a little bit better now, because there might have been some fans who would have gone, well, why couldn't we get one of those two and a 24-year-old who scored 15 last season? Whereas in reality, that's not how it's got to work. You're not going to be able to afford someone who has scored 15 goals. Let's say Emil Rees at the time, for example. You're not going to have been able to afford to pay money for him and Sinclair Armstrong and Fally Mayulu. It kind of had to be him or those two, or other young targets, which perhaps would have been better or worse. We don't really know.
Yeah, and I guess if I'm looking at it with not necessarily rose-tinted glasses on, but if you're trying to give the club credit, which I think we're all quick to be critical, aren't we? You need to be positive when you can be. If you're trying to do that, you can say their kind of business this summer almost feels like a reaction to what happened last year. Rather than going out and getting two young forwards, you go and get an Emil Rees, and you're probably paying him a lot more wages wise than you're paying Fally Sinks, and he'll have had a big signing on fee because he was a free agent. But you know what you're getting, and similar to a degree with Adam Randall, or even Vitek's kind of the one that breaks the mold there. But Neto Borges is very much a case of, we sign him now because he knows the division. You bring him in, he hits the ground running. You don't have that sort of uncertainty of a Yuhira Kawa or a Fally. It does feel like this summer the recruitment kind of changed a little bit, and it feels like maybe lessons. I doubt they'd ever say lessons have been learned, as they obviously don't view last summer's recruitment as negative at all, because you did get Twiney, McNally's, McGuane for the season he was there was kind of that sensible additions. But it does feel like they've maybe taken that step back and gone for the more surefire business this year. Yeah,
which I think is my preferred approach. It's what we were doing under Nige for large parts, wasn't it? It was bringing in someone like, I can't think off the top of my head now, Chris Martin, for example. I appreciate I think he might have actually come in under Holden, but that was sort of the model towards the back end of the Lee Johnson period as well. It was Adam Webster had played at championship level. Andy Vyman had hundreds of games at this level. De Silva, Palmer, Callas had already been here on loan. Bentley had a lot of games at this level. I prefer those sort of signings where you know what you're getting. And I think everyone can go, right, yeah, fair play, that's a good signing. Take Adam Randall, Emil Rees as perfect examples of that this season. Neto, maybe a little bit more of an unknown, just where he's a bit younger and obviously been around less.
Hey, he's older than you think, Neto. But, he's older than you think. He's 29, I think, Neto Borges.
Oh, never mind then.
I met him for the first time yesterday, and I was shocked when I was doing my research. I thought he was younger than that, but either way, he's kind of newer to the championship than others, isn't he? I guess.
Yeah, definitely. Well, there we go. That's caught me off guard. But Vitek has probably been the only sort of proper unknown, I guess, unless you play Football Manager, that we've signed this season.
Yeah, and there's probably the perfect world's probably a mix of the two, isn't it? You get your couple of unknowns and a couple of provens, which is probably what they tried to do last year with Twynham, McNally, and McGuane to a degree. But yeah, I think that was an interesting comment. And then I guess the next one that kind of stood out to me when I was sat there listening, I was away in the back with my laptop out trying to take as many notes as I could, was around the contract situations of Anis, Mehmeti and Zach Vyner. Again, we can't quote verbatim. I've not got the full transcript in front of me. But the suggestion was that both players have been offered deals. I think that was Brian Tinian who said that. They've both been offered deals. And I think he said a few other players heading towards the back end, they've started to talk to. I guess that was probably the expectation. I think, when I spoke to Tom Rawcliffe after the transfer window, he was very keen to say, we want these negotiations and talks to kind of play out behind closed doors. We don't want it to be a media circus where, you've got people tweeting about, oh, he's rejected this, or he wants this, or that, or the other. So, although it's probably something everyone assumed was the case, it's out there now. I guess, what's your sort of thinking to that one, Jack?
It probably shouldn't have been put out there, if we're being honest. But obviously, like you said, it has been. I think hopefully we get at least one of them tied down before January. I feel like it's maybe more likely to be Vyner that signs on first, would be kind of my gut feeling. He's been here however many years now, made over 250 appearances, I think he hit recently. So yeah, I think he'll be the one that comes in first. Mehmeti, obviously, it'd be excellent if we can get him tied down, but whether or not that will happen, obviously, we'll wait and see. It goes the same for players like Mark Sykes as well. I think he's another one that we need to really look at and try and get tied down if he carries on some of the performances he's shown so far this season.
Yeah, I think it's natural, isn't it, that you kind of assume Vyner would be slightly more likely because he's a local boy, he's a defender. There's probably, it feels like attackers are more often the players to leave on frees, doesn't it? Than I don't know if there's any actual evidence of that, but that's what it feels like. I think there'll be two schools of thought about it being out there, won't there? There'll be people who view it as, if you want it behind closed doors, don't have it out there. Equally, it was probably common sense to everyone that they would have been offered deals. When you've got a manager who's very openly said he really likes the pair of them, and you've got, I think Tom's comment, again, I've not got it written down in front of me, but to us, after the window was very much a case of we want to keep our best players. The one follow-up after that I thought was, he put it really well, Tom, I felt, that he basically said there's two options, isn't there? They either sign or they don't. And if they do sign, brilliant. If they don't, we need to put ourselves in a position so that either in January or next summer, we can go out and replace them adequately to the right level, or we have an academy player ready to step in. And I guess that's the promising thing. And perhaps we kind of mentioned it with the strikers. That's maybe what they didn't do with Tommy Conway when they sold him. If they've got those preparations in place so they're able to react no matter what happens, that should only be a positive thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, it was put really, really well. And I think, again, another thing that has now been laid out quite clearly to fans who maybe wouldn't have thought of it in that sort of way beforehand. That hopefully, now it's been said at least, the club are kind of leaning towards just being prepared for anything, is how you'd like to interpret that anyway, or you'd hope that they would be. And like you say, the Conway situation, obviously it was a sale, not a contract running down type deal. But if I'm right in saying he would have been out of contract like summer that's just finished, we had a year left. So, we always knew we were going to get offers for him. He had a good season. It scored notable goals as well against West Ham, and they got a lot of media coverage at the time. And yeah, we probably weren't best prepared for it. We'd already bought in, obviously, Mayulu before he'd gone. Had Sinks come in before he'd gone? He might have done, I think.
I think they were both. It was Twine happened quite quickly after Conway went, wasn't it? I think so. It was kind of like almost they kind of replaced him before he went. It felt like, didn't it? Really?
Yeah, sort of. But just unfortunately, I guess not with the same sort of quality that we were maybe hoping they'd turn out to be. Which, like I said, they could still do that, but they've not shown too many signs of that being the case as of late.
Yeah, I think it's one of those where probably fans won't be nervous yet, will they? But when you start to get around to January, and if there's not been extensions agreed by then, suddenly the option of signing a pre-contract in Europe or abroad comes around, doesn't it, for both players? Again, it kind of feels to me that, Mehmeti is probably a more likely winger to head out to Europe than Zach Vyner. That might be rubbish, but it just feels Zach Vyner feels the interest we've heard about mainly has been in the Championship, hasn't it? So you think the likes of Blues and Wrexham, if they were interested in the summer, still would be next summer. But I think it's an interesting one. It's one of those that almost now it kind of no one's going to be nervous now. If you get to January and it's not signed, that's when it's going to get to a bit of almost squeaky bum time, and it feels like all those nerves are going to start.
Yeah, definitely. I think, like you said, Vyner's maybe the one that I'll be less nervous about if it's not tied down in January, because it feels like he's the one that will probably attract less interest from abroad. Because in my head, at least, this might be complete nonsense. If you're sending scouts to go and watch players, they're from abroad, they're probably going to go and watch the people who are scoring goals. Like, they're arguably the more important people for teams, or the more desirable sometimes, perhaps. Whereas, like you said, all the reported interest, certainly at the back end of the window, was from Wrexham. Obviously, we were knocking back those bids, which was really, really good to see. But it all kind of is of little use if we then end up losing him for a free in the summer.
No, exactly. There was like plenty more covered. I'm kind of just want to touch on the main bits. I'm looking back through here, and there was mention about the academy, and I think Leo Peckover's praises were sung again. Confidence that there is the structure in place to help academy players come through. I think the messaging often has been that basically because the standard of coaching and training's gone up under Liam and now Gerhard, it's actually just harder for those academy players to break through. Which would suggest the evidence is kind of there, isn't it? Because we've heard that Elijah Morrison's been training, Leo Peckover's been training, Jamie Knight-Labelle was very close throughout the summer. It was a very late decision for him to go out on loan. Adam Murphy, you've got these young players that are kind of knocking on the door, but it's proven to be that final step that's probably a bit harder. Then I guess the other question, but we don't want to spend too much time on this. Another bit that really stuck to me was about the investment. The question was raised about the women's team's takeover, which Tom Rawcliffe confirmed, it's basically, we all kind of know the details of that. We've discussed it on here in detail. It needs to be ratified by the WSL, and the hope is that will be done in the next couple of weeks. That then brought up the question, naturally, of a potential takeover of the men's side, to which, he basically said, nothing's imminent, but it's no secret that, they're open to selling. I think it basically said, the Lansdowns won't be here forever. It will happen at some point. Obviously, things can be split up. I think we've said it on here before. The women's takeover kind of showed it that things can be split up. It's not a case of someone has to come in and buy Bristol Sport. If it was Bristol City Holdings, it seems like that can be split up. Then he was asked, we're jumping forward a fair bit, about the interest from the speculation around the Saudi interest. I don't know. We can't quite verbatim. I think he basically said there'd been a conversation, and that there was interest from all over the world. He earmarked the Middle East and the US as kind of the two primary places interest is going to come from. I guess just in that sort of whole bit as a whole, Jack, like what are your kind of thoughts on the talk around takeover investment and reported interest from around the world?
I don't think it's overly shocking. It was interesting to hear him say that there had been conversations with is it Turkey Al-Akish, something like that?
Al Sheikh or Al Kish? I'm not sure.
Along those lines, with the rumored Saudi sort of lead of the Saudi takeover. Interesting to hear that those have happened. Also, kind of pretty expected to hear that nothing's happened with them really. Interest from all over the world doesn't massively shock me. I think he was kind of saying that that a lot of the interest, will come from the States, the Middle East. That's, if you look through the Premier League, that's basically where everyone's owned by now. It's kind of one of those two places, or regions, I should say, probably. But yeah, it'll be interesting to wait and see what happens. It's interesting to know that nothing's imminent, but it wasn't anything overly sort of surprising, I don't think.
Yeah, I think we always say in the transfer windows that you can report interest. I can be interested in buying Bristol City, but just because I'm interested in it doesn't mean it's going to happen. Anyone can be interested in buying a football club. Just because you hold an interest doesn't mean it will happen. So I think, nothing imminent. It's kind of where we, I guess, assume it was always going to be. There were other bits, they spoke about appointing Gerhard and the contrast between him and Liam Manning's style. Basically said that they feel Gerhard's the perfect fit. There was talk about Radek Vitek's loan. And, of course, there is there is a recall option in January, which City publicised from the start. That he could be recalled. They did mention, they were asked about signing him permanently, which I was slightly surprised that they did answer. They basically did say that, they asked the question and were quite quickly rebuffed by Manchester United. On the whole, though, I think it was quite a positive forum. I think thought they handled the more challenging questions really well. I didn't think there was anything. Sometimes you can sit there and you go, "Oh my God, why have they said that?" I don't think there was any of that really. It was quite a positive evening.
Yeah, definitely. The one question that did make me chuckle is I always find it interesting in these things because you get however many people turn up asking really interesting questions. We're Category 2 Academy.
I know exactly which one you're going to ask.
To Portsmouth, and then you get Rob Dickey. Do any of your mates not like to fly? And I was like, well, I suppose it's an interesting point, but it just made me laugh. I thought I'd mention it.
Yeah, I thought it was incredible how early on that question came. That's the sort of one you expect maybe after an hour and a quarter. So I've that about 10 minutes in. I thought, I couldn't quite believe it. But fair play. It takes a lot of I always think it takes a lot of confidence to stand up in front of what is typically an incredibly packed room and ask the question. We have to do it in every press conference in front of about 3 people, and sometimes that can be difficult enough. But to do it in front of, I don't know how many people were watching it at home and how many people were there, but it takes plenty of confidence. So I thought it was a positive evening.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it leads us. You mentioned there the what's the word? Contrast between Struber and Manning. Obviously, we've got to play Liam Manning side this weekend. I think that leads us quite nicely into Gerhard Struber's press conference.
Yeah, so we were up at the HPC probably about 7 hours before the forum for presser, and as we kind of arrived, everyone, there's only me and the BBC there normally, but it was quite clear everyone wanted to know what was going on with Adam Randall, really, because there's been this random speculation and rumor around the last few days, basically saying that not only is he injured, but they've basically got no midfielders. He's got injured on Monday, and Lord knows he's going to be playing in midfield. And obviously it's all off the record what happens before the presser, but don't think that Bristol City might be saying Gerhard was basically as baffled as everyone else as where that had come from. And he he confirmed in the press that he is fit, and there was a bit of a wider injury update. But first, I just how big a boost is it? They've not, although they never had lost him, to have not lost Adam Randall feels like a massive boost.
Oh yeah, massively. I think I messaged you as soon as the rumor sort of started swirling. I was playing some darts at uni, and I was like, oh no, we've not got a midfield. We're gonna have to play Zach Vyner and Ross McCrory in there, and we were both quite confused by the rumor, but thankfully, no truth to it in the end, which is nice.
Yeah, it's kind of, it feels a bit over to sort of say the only positive bit of injury news, but it felt like the main bit of injury news of the good sort of persuasion, because we asked about basically all the long-term absentees, and I'll kind of run it down here now. Joe Williams, it doesn't sound like he's likely to play this calendar year, looking more like a January return for him, which Gerhard mentioned he was incredibly frustrated, and I think the way he put it was not always in the best mood, which you can't really blame him, can you? What looked like it was going to be a 6 to 8 week, 12, I think it might even mean 12-week injury from that playoff semi-finals, now going to keep him out for the best part of half a year. So it's got him for him. Jason Knight, I think it was 6 to 8 weeks, Jack, am I right in saying, he said?
Yeah, but we're hoping that I'll be 6 to 8 weeks from the injury, but probably not.
I think we can assume it's probably 6 to 8 weeks from now, but sometimes with Gerhard's English, the time frames aren't exact, but I'd assume if he said 6 to 8 weeks, it'll be 6 to 8 weeks from now. Max Bird, less specific a time frame, but basically suggested closer than Jason Knight and Joe Williams. I think it was weeks. He kind of suggested hopefully a few weeks rather than a long-term one. Max O'Leary is fit and sounds like he will be with the squad on Saturday. It does sound like it'll be Radovic in goal, though. Still remain as number one, which I don't think comes as a massive surprise. Cam Pring, a few more weeks, I think he said, but hopeful that he will play this calendar year. So it sounds like he's probably a bit behind Knight and Bird, I'd imagine, but closer than Williams. And, he's always been clear that they've got to be really careful with him, because I think there's probably a feeling that he's been rushed back a couple of times when he probably shouldn't have been, and it's not helped him. And then the final one, I guess we started on a more positive one with Randall. We'll try to end on a more positive one with Josh Stokes. Hopefully he'll be back in training in a couple of weeks' time, really, which probably a bit quicker than he initially suggested with that metatarsal. But I guess just your overall thoughts, Jack, on that. It's a real... It wasn't until I wrote the piece yesterday and wrote down all those names, you're like, oh my God, that's like half the team that got into the playoffs is still out, really.
Yeah, and then you throw Luke McNally into the mix as well, who obviously we know isn't going to be back till January, February time. He's not even registered for the first half of the season, so there's very little point in even asking about him at the moment. But he's going to be like a new signing again when he comes back. I'm sure he was excellent before his injury, and he was actually having a really good game the day he got injured as well. I thought against Swansea, I think he nearly scored from what I remember. But yeah, him coming back, Stokes being back soonish is good. Max Bird, hopefully, maybe around the next international break with a bit of luck, would be my sort of hoping for it anyway, so that we can get two proper midfielders back in midfield would be nice. Yeah, I think going on to Pring, he's definitely been rushed back a couple of times, I think. Obviously, he was out with that sort of random injury he picked up against Cardiff last season when he caught some studs to his sort of lower leg, wasn't it, in his calf, and he was out for quite a while then, and then he picked up another one at some point, and he probably shouldn't have really been playing in the playoffs from what I remember. Remember seeing him limping around Bramall Lane in that second leg, and it was just kind of, we were struggling to field 11 players at points in those last few games, I think, with or certainly 11 players in the right positions anyway, with the injuries and Dickie's red card as well. So that's 4, 5, 6, first team ready players that, like you said, we're all a large part of that squad last season who got us in the top 6. So come January, were we on a title charge?
Well, I think that it's that weird thing, isn't it? I guess every club has injuries, but you kind of have to stop and think, oh my God, like, to lose. I mean, for all three midfielders to be out and be left with Randall, let's be clear, has done an incredible job. It's bad luck. But I guess the questions would be, is it bad luck, or are they doing something wrong? And there's probably something we can ask Gerhard about, because it does feel it feels weird that a lot of the injuries seem to have come in quite similar positions, and whether that's okay. It might just be that they're probably doing more running now in this system than they were before. Maybe that's a correlation. I don't know. It's always hard to know how much to read into these sort of things, I think. But I think it kind of takes us on to Norwich in general quite well, doesn't it? It's been an interesting start. Liam Manning's done his press conference as well. He's obviously under a bit of early pressure there because of what has been a disappointing start, I think it'd be fair to say, after quite an exciting summer transfer window for them. They sit 19th in the league. They've won twice in the Championship so far this season, yet to win at Carrow Road, and come into this one off of the back of a derby defeat to Ipswich Town, the first defeat to the Tractor Boys in 16 years. It does have that sort of feel, Jack, and I'm sure Norwich will be kind of thinking the same, that if City could get ahead early, the sort of game where you can really put them on the back foot and that probably kill the atmosphere inside Carrow Road.
Yeah, I think it'll be one similar to what we've seen a couple of times this season. I think if we can nick one early, the floodgates might open, for want of a better word. I'm not talking to the point of like 5, 6, 7, but if we could maybe be 2 up at half time, something like that would be ideal. And it'll be interesting. I think, unfortunately, I can't make it, but it'll be interesting to see what sort of reception Liam Manning gets in the away end as well, from the away end, I should say. I'll be keeping an eye out for that on Twitter, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's been a bit of a topic, hasn't it, over the international break? Just, I think there's a few people that have said, remember what he's done for this club. A few other people going, well, he's jumped at the first time, so why should I? My honest thinking is, it's not for me or you to tell anyone how to feel, is it? I think that's kind of the impression I've had from it. Boo if you want, don't boo if you want, cheer him, do whatever you want. I think the facts are, he's only the first manager in nearly 20 years to get that team into a playoff place. He deserves credit for the job he did. I wrote that at the time. I felt, he, considering a lot of us didn't feel the recruitment was particularly the best, to get that team into the playoffs with the injuries and the personal circumstances he had, he deserved credit. Equally, he did leave, and the circumstances in which he left will have rubbed fans the wrong way, and I think that's fine. I think he doesn't deserve plenty of stick. If you want to give him a little bit of stick, do. I don't think it's that big a deal to me, especially because Struber's come in and done really well. I think it's almost just that thing of these things happen in football. I think when it's your club, you can make too much of a big deal of these things sometimes, can't you?
Yeah, definitely. A few of my mates are going up, and I was saying to them, whoever we were playing at home last, QPR, I was like, what are you gonna like? What's your reaction gonna be in the away? And they were like, I don't really care. Like, he's on. It's booing him, cheering him, whatever you do. It's not gonna put him back in the dugout. And let's be honest, he's not having a great time of it in the dugout at the moment, anyway. So, would you want him back over Struber? I wouldn't be too bothered either way, personally. If I was going, I don't think I'd cheer. I don't think I'd boo. I think I'd probably just stand there and sing an actual City song and support the players that we have got rather than having a dig at a manager that we don't.
Yeah, I think your sentiment there is probably echoed by Gerhard Struber. I've not put the piece out at the time of recording, but both me and Rich and the BBC kind of asked him about, do you give any oxygen to the fact you are playing the old manager of your team? How much does that play on the players at all? And he was like, do you know what? He was quick to credit him. He was like, he did a really good job. He's laid the foundations. He's taken them to the playoffs. I've taken over his team. He was quick to praise him, but equally turned around and said, we're focused on our team. Obviously, it helps that we've got a load of players that we can pick the brains of about what his team might play like. But his focus is very much on City rather than Norwich, and that's exactly how you want it to be. They're going up there to try to impose their style rather than focus on what they might do.
Yeah, and like you said, Struber mentioned it. Dickie mentioned it last night as well. I think he got asked about it, or well, they kind of both did during the fans forum. And yeah, he was saying, we'll go out there. Credit to Liam, he did a great job. He got the best out of. He will get the best out of a lot of the players, to be fair. Or what we thought was maybe the best at the time. We've probably seen a different level to a couple of them, like Mehmeti this season. I think that'll be fair to say. But yeah, we'll go out there, hopefully come back with 3 points. That's all I'm really bothered about, to be honest.
Yeah, I guess if we just touch on the team, I think it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because if you'd asked most City fans to pick the team the day after QPR, they might have, despite having no players, they'd have probably been keen to see like 7 or 8 changes. There's no one really back from injury other than Max O'Leary, and I think we can pretty confidently say it will be Vitek who starts some goals with O'Leary back. Would you like to see many, if any, changes really up at Carrow Road?
Is there anywhere we can change?
Wingback's the obvious one, isn't it?
Yeah,
right.
I think
at
QPR who started against QPR.
It was it Sykes and Neto, I think. And
yes, it was.
Sykes and Neto
at a break. I'd probably bring Ross back in. I think Neto played quite well. I think he's played quite well in most of the games so far, to be fair to him, for City. I don't recall off the top of my head him having a particularly bad performance. I thought he was really good against Ipswich, which was his first start, maybe, I think. And he did all right against QPR. Everyone was bad in the second half against QPR, so I'm not going to put that on him. Like you said, I think if you'd asked me this in the last episode we did, I think I'd have been asking for all sorts. But with a bit more of a calmer head on, we'll go with maybe McCrory back in for Sykes. But other than that, there's not a whole lot we can do, really.
No, that's kind of my feeling is I think McCrory's probably in your best team, isn't he? And that's not a slight on Sykes, but to me, Ross, your best City team should have Ross McCrory in it. And when you've had 2 weeks off and he didn't go away with Scotland, to me, I'd probably start him in there. I guess the other topic of conversation, like you said, there's not many areas in which City can change, but the other one that's been mentioned is whether you kind of change up that midfield to get that Vyner back in the back line. From my point of view, I think he's probably the best option in the midfield, so you kind of need him there. Would you be at all tempted to throw like a Neto or Ross into the middle of the park so you could get him back on the right side, or would you be keener to stand by?
I think I'd stick with Vyner. I mean, I said at the time when it initially happened, I don't understand why McCrory's not stepped in there. But to be fair to him, Vyner's done an excellent job. I think they could have both done it. I think they probably could have both done it pretty equally as well. I think if you were to take Vyner out of midfield, I think you're a lot more likely maybe to see Twine drop back and play almost a Paul Scholes-y type role where he's sort of spraying the balls around from the middle of the park, or a Wayne Rooney towards the back end of his career, rather than seeing a different defender push in there. But then it's a case of who do you put in the 10? I suppose you could go with Sykes maybe and keep him in the 11.
Yeah.
I think he does play a lot better further forward because he's been all right at wing back when we've seen him do that. He had a little goal scoring run, didn't he, last season from there, with a goal against Norwich actually at Ashton Gate. But I think he's better going forward. He does track back, but not always very well. So yeah, I think if I was to change it in the midfield, I'd maybe drop Twine back, but I don't see that being the case.
I think it'll be, my gut feeling is one change and McCrory in for Neto. Not to spoil the predicted team, which please all read on Saturday morning. But I think that's what I'll go with. I guess kind of before we do a score prediction, it is worth mentioning it's another big week, isn't it? You know, we kind of had our first taste of the 3-game weeks just before the break, and we come straight back into one with obviously Norwich. Then it's Southampton on Tuesday night, isn't it? Ashton Gate, and then Blues on the Saturday. And it does feel like, I think, obviously, I'd say Southampton and Blues probably haven't had the start of the season they'd like, neither of Norwich. On form, it doesn't feel like 3 of the toughest games. But I remember when the fixtures came out, looking at that sort of run and thinking, oh, that could be a really interesting week.
I think we need to start it well. I think we need to win Saturday, because then we go, if we don't win Saturday, all right, we've had that break, but it then becomes 5 without a win. You get into Southampton, who, despite the fact they've not started great, they're still a very good squad. Like, make no mistakes about it. You know, Ipswich didn't have the best of starts, and they're still a very good squad. They then turned up and smashed Sheffield United 5-0. So, you know, they looked like a playoff contender when they came to Ashton Gate. I thought they looked kind of how everyone would have expected them to at the start of the season. Southampton are bound to be doing that at some point. Whether or not it happens straight away from now, I don't know. But I think 3. I think you take. I'd love 9, but I think I'd take 5 or 6 out of this quite happily.
Yeah, it feels incredibly similar to the block before the break, where, you know, you went Preston, really tough place to go. They don't lose many at home. Ipswich, oh God, they'll be up there. Are you going to get anything from that? And then QPR, they've started well as well. It almost feels like exactly the same block, where like every one of those games where you're thinking, oh God, this could go either way. But on form, they should be confident. And, you know, we've seen it at Ashton Gate. Other than Oxford, they've basically been in every game they've played, which I know is mental to say with the QPR result, but they could have quite easily won that game. So if you're going on performances, there's no reason why they can't be targeting 9 from these 3. But I think I'm with you. I think it's that weird thing of you'd almost rather play great in 2 of them, win 2 of them, and get thumped in the other one and take 6 points. It could quite easily be one of those where you end up taking 3 points in any way, shape, or form and still play well. So I think we've said it a lot, I think, on this podcast, but we'll have probably a better idea of just where this City team are come the end of this block. And I know I keep saying that, but it's that really condensed block as well, isn't it? Because after these 3, I think it's only 3 more games in the space of about 2 weeks, and then you're off for another break. It is bizarre, really.
Yeah, I don't like this. Well, I love the start of the season from an aspect of I get to watch football again, but I don't like how stop-start it is. It really annoys me. But that's a subject for another day.
Yeah.
So hopefully, come these next 5 or 6, however many it is, it's a tough run as well, isn't it? We've got Stoke after Blues, and Watford, which isn't an easy place to go, despite a couple of decent recent results up there. That 4-1, 4-0 on Boxing Day a couple of years ago. Under Liam Manning.
Is Blackburn
yes, it is. Blackburn at home, and then and then the international break.
Yeah, they're not easy, are they? They're not easy, but we've kind of seen it this season. You know, this team can put people away when they play well. It's one of my favourite quotes we've had from, I think it was Emil Rees. Yeah, it was like a few weeks ago. It was basically, when we play well, we'll beat them. And I quite like that. You know, that's a really good attitude to have. I guess it's now down to them. You got to play well. So that's kind of quite a nice note to finish on. I think just before we do, we'll have score predictions for the weekend. Jack, what do you reckon for Norwich?
Well, I wrote an article earlier, which everyone should go and read on my Twitter. It's definitely got to be better than Dan's. So, you know, we'll go with a 2-1 win for City is what I put in that. And I got it right last time I put a score prediction on here, I think. I think I said 3-0 at Hillsborough. So hopefully we'll get it right again. Who knows?
Yeah, I'm going to say 2-2. I don't know why. I just think like it feels like a big game, doesn't it? And I just think sometimes a nice entertaining draw. But City's recent record there is all right, so I wouldn't be totally shocked to see a win. Like I say, that kind of takes us to the end today. We'll obviously have an episode next week. We're not quite sure when, probably after the Tuesday night game, heading into the weekend. Until then, there'll be plenty of content over on both the Bristol City live page, Twitter. You can find us Facebook. We've got a WhatsApp channel, and obviously the Bristol Live website. You can find all the Jack stuff on his Twitter. That he's shamelessly plugged already, so you can you can find it all on there.
Got to.
But until next week, that'll be it from us. Obviously, we'll have live coverage from Carrow Road and plenty of reaction to come. So please come and find us on wherever you get your articles and social media channels. And please give us a like and a rating on this podcast. It really does help if you can give us a review. But yeah, until then, Jack, been good to speak to you.
Yeah, and you, mate. Also, final message for people. We do want to try and get guests on at some point. So if someone can maybe leave a couple of suggestions for us, we'll see what we can try and do, I think.
Yeah, definitely. We want to try to do that sooner rather than later. So yeah, thanks everyone for listening, and we'll catch you in the next one.